Guess what? YouTube says that I'm alive. Hi, it's Gordon Causey, as always, coming to you on this. It's 11:15 p.m. on Friday night, the 20th of September, and I wasn't planning to do a video tonight, so hopefully this one will be short. I just wanted to share something, a word that came to me. Take that as you will. I was earlier this evening scrolling through my YouTube feed or whatever you want to call it, just scrolling down, seeing the videos that YouTube was suggesting. And one of them, you probably know if you've done this, most of you will have, they have shorts sometimes. And one of the shorts had something to do with Russell Brand, who's an individual I know very little of. Very little of. I know he's a celebrity and British and very well spoken. He talks 100 miles an hour. And I also know that he made a lot of news lately over the fact that he's professing he's been publicly baptized, or he's been baptized, I think, in the Jordan River. And it was on stage with Tucker Carlson and gave a very loquacious, very well-spoken prayer. And that's about, and before that, before his conversion, I don't know that much about him. I do know that, he does. I noticed when I first came across him that he certainly has the outward appearance, the physical appearance of the manner in which Jesus Christ is so often represented, with the long hair and the beard. But to be entirely honest, full disclosure, I never really liked the guy before or now. Like it's just a personality thing. I don't care for him. Or rather, I should say, I don't care for his public persona, because maybe he's a different person face to face in personal interactions. But he rubs me the wrong way. And there are individuals like this. We all have actors we like or don't like, or personalities that just rub us the wrong way for whatever reason. Some others on this theme of those who have converted to Christianity or have made public pronouncement of a conversion, coming to faith. Jim Carrey's another who I never cared for. I always found his acting chewing the scenery. I just never really cared. Another one, nothing to do with Christianity though, Nicolas Cage. These are just, but I'm going away from the point. And the point is this: I saw this little short video, and the subject of it was Russell Brand, and three words came to my mind. Who warned you? And I knew it was a biblical quote. Who warned you? And I knew I knew the reference, but I don't know chapter and verse. I'm horrible that way. So I simply went on I did a search, Bible quote, and then in quotes, who warned you? And I found the passage. And I wanted to share it with you because I think it speaks to the times that we're living in. Anyway, I'm going to start. It's the quote that I put up in the subject line is chapter 3, verse 7, but I'm going to read a little more than that. I'm going to start right at the beginning because context matters. So chapter 3 of the Gospel according to Matthew, starting in verse 1. In these days came John the Baptist, preaching in the wilderness of Judea. Quote, repent, for the kingdom of heaven is at hand, unquote. For this is he who was spoken of by the prophet Isaiah when he said, the voice of one crying in the wilderness, prepare the way of the Lord, make his paths straight. Verse 4. Now John wore a garment of camel's hair and a leather girdle around his waist, and his food was locusts and wild honey. Verse 5. Then went out to him Jerusalem and all of Judea and all the region about the Jordan, and they were baptized by him in the river Jordan, confessing their sins. This is verse 7. But when he saw many of the Pharisees and Sadducees coming for baptism, he said to them, quote, You brood of vipers. There's an exclamation point. You brood of vipers, exclamation point. Who warned you to flee from the wrath that is to come? That is verse 7. The word that came to me. Sheriff is here. It says he's eating manna. But when he saw many of the Pharisees and Sadducees coming for baptism, he said to them, You brood of vipers, who warned you to flee from the wrath to come? Then verse 8 is, Bear fruit that befits repentance, and do not presume to say to yourselves, We have Abraham as our father. For I tell you, God is able from these stones to raise up children to Abraham. Even now, the axe is laid to the root of the trees. Every tree, therefore, that does not bear good fruit is cut down and thrown into the fire. I baptize you with water for repentance, but he who is coming after me is mightier than I, whose sandals I am not worthy to carry. He will baptize you with the Holy Spirit and with fire. His winnowing fork is in his hand, and he will clear his threshing floor and gather his wheat into the granary, but the chaff he will burn with unquenchable fire. I'm going to read right to the end of the chapter. Verse 13. Then Jesus came from Galilee to the Jordan to John to be baptized by him. John would have prevented him, saying, quote, I need to be baptized by you, and do you come to me? But Jesus answered him, quote, Let it be so now, for thus it is fitting for us to fulfill all righteousness, end quote. Then he, John the Baptist, consented. Verse 16, and when Jesus was baptized, he went up immediately from the water, and behold, the heavens were opened, and he saw the Spirit of God descending like a dove and alighting on him. And lo, a voice from heaven saying, quote, This is my beloved Son, with whom I am well pleased. Thus ends the reading of the word. Thanks be to God. What does it mean? Why did this word come to me? I think we live in an age of a cult of personality, and I'm guilty of it too. There are individuals I follow, individuals whose I follow here on YouTube or other places. Some are famous, like Jordan Peterson, I've spoken of. Some are not so famous, like this gentleman, I think he's down in Texas, named Vincent Rhodes, who does his Coffee with Jesus. But ultimately, I'm not following Jordan Peterson, Vincent Rhodes, or any, Alistair Beggs, another name that I've mentioned, another famous pastor, John MacArthur. We don't follow these individuals. We follow, Christians are to follow Jesus Christ. He is the way, not Russell Brand, not Jim Carrey, not anyone else. And Christians are often asked, sometimes, like there have been a number of celebrity, I'll call them conversions. Kanye West comes to mind years back, Alice Cooper, and others. They make loud public pronouncements of their conversion to the Christian faith. And I think it is wise to be circumspect. And I'm saying I don't want to use the word skeptical, but at the same time, not to be all yay, just take a deep breath and realize that ultimately what matters most is not your relationship with anyone but the King of Kings and the Lord of Lords, and not to get caught up in this cult of personality, who were, when Matthew's gospel says, but when he saw many of the Pharisees and Sadducees coming for baptism. Who were the Pharisees and the Sadducees? This was a hyper-religious society, Jerusalem, Judea, hyper-religious society, and these were the celebrities of the day. They got the places of honor in the synagogues. They wore the nicest clothes. They were looked up to and revered. And so I see a parallel. I do see a parallel. And to the celebrities we see in the world now, making public pronouncements of their coming to faith in Jesus Christ. But when he saw many of the Pharisees and Sadducees, the celebrities in a religious society, they would have been that, the Pharisees and Sadducees coming for baptism, he said to them, quote, "You brood of vipers, who warned you to flee from the wrath to come? Bear fruit that befits repentance, and do not presume to say to yourselves, we have Abraham as our father." Yeah, but I'm taking from that, who warned you to flee from the wrath to come. Is there wrath to come? I think there is. We've just seen what's happened in northern Israel, in Beirut, in Lebanon, with the Operation Exploding Pager, or Operation Below the Belt. It's led to all kinds of labels being put on it and all kinds of jokes being attached to it. Everyone's seen the little pager Motorola meme with the text, "No 72 virgins for you." Then it blows up. There's wide speculation that there's going to be a ground invasion of southern Lebanon. And when that happens, assuming it's going to, I think it will. I've said that many times here. I'm not making a prediction as to when. I still think Israel could be softening up the ground. There are reports now that Israel has just taken out a number at 14, 15, a dozen or so anyway, senior Hezbollah militants, kind of the upper ranks of their chain of command. And why would they? Apparently, they were meeting in a residential building complex in Beirut, and Israel hit that location and apparently took all of them out. And you would think, why would Hezbollah be putting all its, its brain trust, in a fashion, their senior leadership, and you're at war? This is a war. It's a war right now. Why would you put your senior leadership all together in the same place, put them at risk like that? And I think the answer is obvious, because they can't communicate any longer. There's no other way for them to communicate. They thought they had this pager network where they could message back and forth with one another in a fashion that would fly below Israel's capacity to surveil them. But that's obviously been taken out. They're certainly not going to want to use cell phones. If they can do what they did to those pagers, they can certainly track and monitor cell phone conversations. So they're not going to, what are they going to use? Carrier pigeons to coordinate? Now, Israel is saying that they were gathering to plan an invasion of northern Israel, that this was an operational meeting to plan a military assault on the Galilee regions of northern Israel. That could very well be propaganda. That could very well be Israeli propaganda. Can they prove it? I doubt it. Unless they have notes, the minutes of the meeting that these dozen or so senior Hezbollah commanders were involved in, unless they had handwritten notes that survived a rocket or missile explosion. So there's that going on. And then I think it's time, I know a lot of people who watch my channel. I've got a number of people in Montreal. I've got people out in BC. I have people from populated centers who watch my videos. And I think there is very much the real potential for there to be acts of terrorism and it doesn't even necessarily, I was thinking about in the context of my own little tiny town in southeastern Ontario. I'm 100 or so miles, 150 or so kilometers from Toronto, from the big smoke from downtown Toronto. Toronto is so sprawling because it starts in Scarborough and doesn't end until Etobicoke. So it's a big behemoth of a metropolitan area. But it's about 100 miles to get right downtown. But even in my little rural area, there are Islamic communities here, and I'm not going to live in fear, and I'm not going, but at the same time, I'm just going to say it's on my mind. Could there be sleeper, what they refer to, in the world of asymmetrical warfare, what are referred to as sleeper cells? I have sheriff of YouTube saying you can't have a war on your own prison population. That's why I don't pay attention to Mesopotamia. Well, Mesopotamia, that's Iraq. And I have had more thoughts on, the entire situation. The simple fact of the matter is that it's why does so much of the world hate Israel? It's because they try to cover it with a thin veneer of historicity that is 99% false. They say that these are the European Jewish immigrants who colonize. These are colonizers, and colonization is bad. But only when it's Jewish colonization. Because when you look at this area of Israel, or call it Palestine, or call it the Levant, call it the Promised Land, call it whatever you want. Call this land whatever you want to call it. But it's always been colonized, going back for thousands of years. If we go back into antiquity, at the time of Moses and Joshua, what were a nomadic people, the people of Israel, the ancient Israelites, were a nomadic people wandering around. And then in the land of Canaan, there were a whole bunch of tribes. There were, I don't know how many ites there were. The Amalekites, the Hittites, the Jebusites, the thisites, the thatites, the Gibeonites. You had all these different groups warring against each other, and the Israelites joined in, and they conquered the land and colonized it. They were one of a number of competing tribes, and they established their kingdoms first a unified kingdom of Israel that later split into two: northern kingdom of Israel, southern kingdom of Judah. But then, the Assyrians wiped out the northern kingdom. The Babylonians conquered the southern kingdom of Judah. And then the Medo-Persians under Cyrus, or Cyrus, however you want to pronounce it, they conquered it. And then the Greeks conquered it. Then the Romans conquered it. And these were all colonial powers, outside powers, conquering the Holy Land. Israel, Palestine, call it whatever you want. They conquered and ruled by Babylonians, by Persians, by Greeks, by Romans. After the Romans, the Byzantines. After the Byzantines, the Arabian colonizers came in and they conquered it. And then you had a period of Egyptian Mamluk. They colonized, conquered it, and they were the colonial power that was ruling it. And then the Ottomans, of course, who are Turkish, and then the Turks lost it to the British. And, so it's always been a colonial holding going back that millennia. And now, for the first time since ancient times, since the first time before Christ, it is ruled autonomously by the people living in the land. There isn't this colonial power. It's not Britain ruling them from Great Britain. It's not the Turks ruling them from Istanbul. It's not the Mamluks ruling them from Egypt, or the Arabians ruling them from the Arabian Peninsula. It's the people living in there are ruling themselves. But this colonialism is okay when anyone else does it. The only time it's wrong is when it's Jewish colonialism, and the Jewish colonials are actually living in the land that they're ruling. So I just find it's the old double standard. What's okay for the rest of the world is not okay for Israel or Jewish people. Anyway, Monarchy writes, these smartphones have AI listening to what's in their detectable vicinity through your microphone when you ostensibly have to set it off. Bang on the money. And you can call it Palestine. That's fine. That's the name the Romans gave it. Rome, after um, they killed 500,000 Jews, and then they sent countless others into slavery, and then you have the diaspora all around the Jews scattered to the four corners of the earth, and then they called it Palestina. The Emperor Hadrian said, we'll show you Jewish people. It's not Israel, it's not Judea, it's not Judah anymore. We're going to name it after the Philistines, Palestina. That was basically the Latin rendering of Philistines. They reached back into the ancient history of Israel and chose to give it the name of people who are actually Philistines are largely regarded to have been from the Greek Aegean Islands, Thrace, Thrace, Thracians or Thracians, and those were the original Palestinians. But whatever, I mean, it's a name, and a rose, or you call it whatever you want, stick whatever label you want on it. I call it Israel because that's what it is. I mean, there's never been a kingdom, a political entity, a kingdom or a country called Palestine ever. It was just a name stuck onto a rough area that includes basically Israel and Jordan. That's Palestine. So if you want to call so the Jews living there now, the Israelis are Palestinians, the Arabs living there are Palestinians, the Druze, the Christians, anyone living in Jordan, Israel is Palestinian if you want. I mean, I'm Canadian. What does that mean? I'm English, Irish, Scottish, Welsh, a little bit of French, maybe, but perhaps a little tiny bit of Native, First Nations, Ojibwe ancestry as well, probably like 0.5%, but whatever, but I'm a Canadian, it's a name. And Canada exists as a political entity. We have a prime minister who, give me the name of a king of Palestine or a king of, or the prime minister or president of Palestine. There's never been one, because there's never been a country called Palestine or a kingdom called Palestine. And Monarchy writes, Palestine sounds like a light-skinned Jew. Well, you can be Jewish Palestinian, sure. I mean, up until 1949 or May 14th, that's when they made their Declaration of Independence, May 14th, 1948. Up until that date, everyone living in that land was Palestinian. You were a Palestinian Jew, Palestinian Christian, Palestinian Arab, Muslim, Palestinian Druze, Palestinian Buddhist. Might have been some Buddhists back then, who knows. Sheriff of YouTube says, what is happening today is nothing like what has happened for 2,000 years. Oh, they certainly didn't have pagers and cell phones and solar panels back when, say, Joshua and Caleb and the other 10 spies were sent into the land of Canaan to spy it out. I mean, there's a better name for it. How about we call it the land of Canaan? If we want to go to the original indigenous population, everyone who's come since the Canaanites have been colonizers. Everyone. The Arab colonizers, Jewish colonizers, or Israeli colonizers, Egyptian Mamluk colonizers, Persian colonizers. It's all colonialism. But the only time it's an issue is when it's Jewish colonialism. That's the problem. Arab colonization, Persian colonization, Egyptian colonization, European, Christian during the Crusades, Christian, European colonization. It's all good. Colonization is fine unless it's Jewish colonization. Then all of a sudden, colonization becomes a bad thing. It's the double standard. And Monarchy, no problem. I like that. Just a simple world play thing he noticed without contact. No worry. Yes, and Monarchy is saying communist harebrain referring to Kamala, is whatever is expedient, whatever will get her the votes. And to a degree, Trump plays the same game, whatever will get him the votes. In politics, they play this game where you try to solidify your own base and fire up those who already support you anyway, and keep them engaged. But at the same time, you hope to wedge, is what they call it, a wedge issue, where you can maybe pull some others into your camp away from the other camp. And every side plays it. I mean, I think there's a tendency to view my side as being all good and the other side as being all bad. And the simple matter of whether it's war or politics, and there are definite parallels between the two, whether it's war or politics. There's a lot of dirty games that get played on every side. All politicians engage in it. That's why I said off the bat, does Israel engage in propaganda? Absolutely. Yeah, there is a political aspect to conflict. When the Allied forces, Canada, the United States, Britain, when we were engaged in World War II, we engaged in propaganda to, spur up the population. In World War I, there was some famous, what they call atrocity propaganda. And what happened is predominantly American newspapers started to print stories about the quote unquote horrible Huns. They started calling the Germans the horrible Huns or the Huns to conjure up images of Attila the Hun, barbaric. And they reported that the horrible Huns, these terrible Germans, were cutting the hands off of Belgian children, and it was in the mainstream press. And so people would read these articles and become emotionally engaged. They were being lied to. There were no German soldiers cutting the hands off of children in Belgium, but the facts don't matter. What matters is triggering an emotional response. Israel tries to trigger an emotional response. They show the pictures of the women who were killed on October 7th, who were charged with, they were sitting at the closed circuit TV cameras watching the Hamas militants breaking down the perimeter border security fence and, heading into southern Israel. And they were all murdered. And they used their pictures prominently to get sympathy and support on their side. And, certainly the babies that were kidnapped by Hamas militants get prominent play because it plays on the emotional heartstrings. As much as I'm able, I try to keep it detached on both sides because I know that war is ugly and horrible things happen in war. And I've read it before. I won't read it again, but Ecclesiastes, the book of Ecclesiastes, informs us that unto everything there is a season. There's a season to plant and a season to pluck up that which was planted. There's a time to cast away stones and a time to gather stones together. It's a time to live. There's a time to die. And there's a time for war and a time for peace. Unto everything there is a season. And sadly, we are in a season of war. It's not the first time. Just going to read up and then I'm going to head to bed. He says, why not just give back the Middle East land to the Arabs and kick out the Russian Jews? Hey, what's wrong with colonialism, Sheriff? Colonialism is fine, unless it's Jewish colonialism. So we should give the land of Canaan, we should let Arab colonizers have it. You say give back, but you have to remember, Arabians are not indigenous to the Levant. They are from the Arabian Peninsula, different geography. The Egyptians, the Mamluks, they're Egyptian, they're African. They're not from the Levant, from Canaan, from this land. Why are they allowed to colonize, but Jews are not? Forget geography. Well, it's all about the reason this happens is because it's Jewish colonization. It's European Jews whose ancestors, going back nearly 2,000 years, this is their ancestral homeland. where they established their kingdoms, Israel and Judah. Anyway, why not just give Jews a part of Zambia? Well, what about the Zambians? You're going to so colonization, Jews can colonize Zambia, but they can't colonize their ancestral homeland? This gets ridiculous. And monarchy. People call that sad specimen Kamala Harris a chameleon. Well, all politicians, to a degree, have to be chameleons. They want to appear, they want to cobble enough votes to get them elected. And in the United States, in a presidential election, you need 50% plus one, pretty much. You got to get just 50% and a little bit more, because it's it's a bipartisan. Or not bipartisan, but it's a bipolar. That's a better way to describe it. It's A or B. It's Kamala or Trump. Pick one. And so, anyway. And monarchy further writes, you can please some people some of the time, but not everyone all the time. Eh? Yeah, exactly. Whale oil beef has come on. Something big has to happen to gain U.S. popular support for the pending war. Will it be what? Election upcoming. There's a lot of speculation that the war between Russia and Ukraine, that the Russians have, this is some of the speculation I'm hearing, that Russia has basically won the war and that Ukraine basically is, defeated. They have made incursions into Russia, but the land that they're occupying is basically unoccupied. It's like hinterland. It's like wilderness. It's like someone conquering, the high Canadian Arctic and claiming a big victory because they have troops there. That the speculation or the rhetoric I'm hearing is that Ukraine has lost, but that the United States is doing everything it can to keep Zelensky going and to maintain the fight until the election comes, because the Biden administration, and by proxy the Kamala Harris administration, has put so much political capital into supporting Ukraine, and to have them lose could impact the results of the election. So they don't want, they want to keep that war going, even though by all, and again, this is the rhetoric I'm hearing, and maybe it's false, maybe it's false, but I tend to lean toward that. The Ukrainians have lost the war. That's my view. But anyway, going on. Whale oil. Something big has to happen to gain U.S. popular support for the pending war. Now they can sell war. They found out how to sell people on staying home, selling people on how to wear masks, selling people on rolling up their sleeves for something that came out in months that should have taken 10 years. So can they sell the war? Oh yeah, they can sell it. And that's where I say you have to get into this book, and you've got to get into a relationship with Jesus Christ, and you have to realize that he is the name above all names. That's the only thing that's going to rescue you from the, and pardon me for saying that, and some will say Christians shouldn't swear, but I'm going to, because it's just one of those things. I don't do it often, but there is a shitstorm coming. There is a shitstorm coming. And it's going, and if you think that if you're going to do everything you can to preserve your life on this side of the veil, you're going to lose life everlasting. Those who seek to save their life will lose it, Jesus said. If you think this life is the only life, that you have to have principles, you have to have beliefs, you have to have convictions that you will be willing to die for. This temporal existence, you will have to be willing to die. Like the early church, what some refer to as the early morning church, when professing Christians went and were burned alive at the stake, were torn apart by wild animals, were boiled in oil. These are the kind of torturous things that the Romans did to those who refused to renounce their belief in Jesus Christ as Lord, and to acknowledge, bow down, bend the knee to the emperor of the day and profess him as God. And thousands refused. And Monarchy is writing shocking oratory and imagery about barbaric ape-like subhumans sticking babies through with bayonets and carrying them as souvenirs. I don't know what to make of that. I have had some further thoughts on as it was in the days of Noah and the Nephilim. But that's a little too, I don't consider anything too far out there to discuss, but there are discussions that you get deep into the weeds. And if you want to approach it reasonably and without sensationalism, that takes a lot of time. So I'm going to leave that for now. Sheriff is retracting a lot of messages. He's wishing me a good night. Very good. I'll wish you a good night as well. And Anna Monarchy writes, land can't be stolen unless it is excavated. Just being semantic. Yes, just playing word games. Anna Monarchy writes, the term brainwashing is really is anti-reality semantic. Brain trashing is more accurate. Yeah, fair enough. Sheriff writes, news. Yeah, Sheriff, I don't really care. You know, I know you don't like Israel. I know you've got a hate on for Jews and all things Jewish. I don't. And Jesus told me, you got to, yeah, yes, dude, are there Jews, especially the ultra-Orthodox, who would spit on me walking down the streets of Jerusalem? Probably, yeah. I can't say for sure, I've never done it, but I've heard stories and I believe them. Yeah, I think so. And what did Jesus tell us? Love your enemies. And they will bow the knee and their tongues will confess Jesus as Lord as well. He is their Messiah. Jesus had to come from the house of David. Jewish had to come from the chosen people. It is from the Jews that Jesus had to come. From the time of Adam and Eve, Satan has been looking to destroy the seed from which the Messiah would come. There was a war in heaven. And there's been a war. We do not fight battles of flesh and blood. This is spiritual warfare in the heavenly realms, in the spiritual realm. And it's been going on for time outside of memory. Whale oil beef. Knowing how the masses have behaved since 2020, I don't think the Bible can trump the television agenda's programming chatter. Not for most, and it's not supposed to. It is not supposed to. You want to be in the majority? Is that the winning way, to be in the majority? Do you want to be with look at when Hitler rode into Austria, when he rode into his native Austria, they were cheering him. When they had the annexation vote, 99.6 or 99.7 of Austrians voted in favor of Hitler's Nazi Germany's annexation of their country. Granted, the ballot had the yes circle where you would mark your X about that size, and just a little tiny one for the no. But Austrians were thrilled. The vast majority were thrilled with the annexation of their country. Do you want to be on the side of the majority, or do you want to be with Christ? I want to be with Christ. I will be with Christ. Anyway, reading on. Now we're going on to fluoride. Amonarchy writes, I found it a funny Seinfeld joke when Kramer said to Jerry, oh yeah, anti-dentites. I saw that episode as well. You're a rabid anti-dentite. Next thing you're going to be saying they should have their own schools, but they do have their own schools. Kramer was funny. Michael Richards. Anyway, that was my message. So ultimately, the name is Jesus Christ. It is a precious name. And that verse again, Matthew 2:7. But when he saw many of the Pharisees and the Sadducees, the celebrities of Judea, when he saw these celebrity Pharisees and Sadducees coming for baptism, John the Baptist said to them, you brood of vipers, who warned you to flee from the wrath to come? Bear fruit that befits repentance, and do not presume to say to yourselves, we have Abraham as our father. And again, that's the reading of God's word. Thanks be to God. And we'll talk to you all later. May the Lord bless and keep you. May the Lord make his face to shine upon you. And may the Lord grant you peace. And if you did like this, thank you for the 4 thumbs up. If you want to subscribe, you're most welcome. If you want to share it out, go ahead. Just the word that came to me this evening. I'm going to keep it under 45 minutes. So God bless everyone. We'll talk to you soon.